Hello. Good morning, SCP Alpha. Good morning, Hash Brown Swag. Good morning, Chin. Happy Friday to all of you. Top of the morning. Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Alex. Did you guys have a good week? An amazing week. Woo! Barely any work? Okay, gotcha. Nice. It's good to get a week to recoup. Abhinav says, what's up? It's a great morning. Homework 7 is behind us. Yes, it is. Today's Mando was very good. Says Stonebuster 1234. Dude, I still haven't watched it. I haven't watched a single episode. Chin says, got stuck on my degree project for several weeks. Are you talking about the project for this class? The graduate project for this class? Or for your, is it a different project? Oh, for your own. What's your project on? Manipulator on Unity and ROS. Oh, very nice. Wait, so you're using Unity to make it look really good? Unity was used to make tons of video games, right? Like, wasn't Fortnite made in Unity? I wish I knew how to use Unity. They have a bunch of tutorials online. Fortnite was made with Unreal. Oh, okay. Build the VR simulation scene for Manipulator. Oh, okay. Wait, this is in VR too? Your project sounds really cool. Many indie game developers use Unity. Oh, wow. That sounds like a very cool project, Chen. I hope you figure it out. All right, everybody. It's Friday. Let's finish up this content here. Next week, So the next week's gonna be our second team project, and I'm trying to get that out today. Like you're gonna know who your new team members are today, and then I'm trying to get the project itself up today. That's my goal. I can give you like a little sneak preview. Where is this? Let's see. So if you look at this is the Skidpad that they use for Formula SAE. So it's these little miniature Formula cars, and they have this Skidpad competition where you come in right here through the entry, and then you complete 2 laps going to the right, and then 2 laps going to the left, and then you exit out through the top. And so the project's going to involve this. And you're going to have to figure out what the steering input should be to your car to make it go through here. And I think I'm going to have you play with the weight distribution of the car a little bit too. So depending on how you play with the weight, it'll be understeer or oversteer. You'll need a different steering command. But I think that'll be cool. You can't hit the cones. But that's like the gist. That's the gist of the project. So I'll get that up today. And then in class next week, we're going to start talking about load transfer. And that means suspension. So I think we'll finish, like the last bit of content for the class will be related to the suspension and how load transfers from the inside to the outside of the car. So it'll be fun. Okay. So we're talking about tangent speed, characteristic speed, and critical speed. So let's review tangent speed really quick. That's the speed at which, if you're cornering at that velocity, at that tangent speed, you will have 0 steady state side slip. So the nose of the car will be aligned with the velocity vector. So this figure on the left is below the tangent speed. So you're going to be nose out of the corner. And when you're going above the tangent speed, you're going to be nose in. And if you're right at the tangent speed, these vectors are aligned. And it's interesting because when you're going at that tangent speed, you're going to have 0 side slip regardless of the steering angle. Like, so we tested that here. This one had 1 degree of steering to the right at the tangent speed. And we see that the blue line is the steady state side slip, and it goes to 0. What if we pump up the steering to 5 degrees? That's here on the right. So we're doing a more extreme corner. The side slip during the transient stage, it increases a little bit, but at steady state, it goes back to 0. So at tangent speed, regardless of the radius of the corner, your nose is going to be pointed right along the velocity vector. So that's tangent speed. The next speed we started talking about is the characteristic speed, and this only pertains to understeer vehicles, which are the vast majority of vehicles. and it's defined as the speed at which an understeer car produces the maximum yaw rate per steer angle. And we looked at this for the BMW M4. So let's go down here a little bit because I have a graph. Okay, so this is for the M4, and what this is showing is speed on the horizontal axis. So we're increasing speed going this way up to like 180 miles per hour. I think the top speed of an M4 is 174 miles per hour. So we're going up to our top speed, and what we're doing is we're plotting the ratio of my steady state yaw rate, that's R, to my steady state steer angle. So as you increase speed, at least up until it looks like 90 miles per hour, you get more yaw rate per steer angle at that speed. So if I introduce 1 degree of steering at 40 miles per hour, I'm going to get more yaw than I would if I introduce 1 degree of steering at 20 miles per hour. So the characteristic speed is the speed at which you get most yaw per steer angle, and that's the characteristic speed. So for an M4, that happens around 90 miles per hour, and if you're going faster than that, this actually drops off a little bit, and you'll get less yaw per steering angle. All right. And so the way where we left off is I want to derive an expression for this characteristic speed so that I can predict what it is without generating this whole plot. Like, just get a function that tells me what that characteristic speed is going to be for a car. And the strategy to do that, which Ricardo pointed out last time, is what I could do is find the velocity where the slope of this function is 0, because that'll be right at the tippy top. So that's what we're going to do right now. So this ratio, R star over D star, we're calling that GR star. So the function that we want to find where the slope is 0 is GR star. All right, so just looking at the graph, we identify the characteristic speed somewhere around 90 miles per hour. But we want to get an expression for this. So GR star is maximized where the derivative of GR star with respect to velocity is 0. So let's run through that. So we're going to plug in GR star right here, and we got a simplified expression for it. It's V over L, the velocity divided by the wheelbase, divided by 1 plus capital K. Capital K is the stability factor. So K is the stability factor, and it's defined as the understeer gradient divided by the wheelbase. So for an understeer car, the understeer gradient is greater than 0, so you'll have a stability factor greater than 0. Your stability factor is equal precisely to 0 if you nail neutral steer. And it's less than 0 if you're oversteer. Okay, so we got to take the derivative of this thing. It's a little annoying because you have that v squared in the denominator. Plus. I'm using the product rule here. Oh, whoops. So this one on the left, that's like taking the derivative with respect to the numerator and leaving the denominator constant. And then for this second piece, I was taking the derivative of the denominator and leaving the numerator constant. So yeah, you can just see I left that constant right here. So that's just the product rule. Okay, so if we kind of simplify this a little bit, one minus kv squared over my wheelbase times 1 plus kv squared squared. All right, so this is the derivative of that function as I change the velocity. Derivative with respect to velocity. So we have to find where this derivative is equal to 0. So if I take this derivative, and if v is equal to v car, well, then I'll plug in this characteristic velocity wherever I see v. And then it'll be equal to 0. So at the characteristic speed, that's equal to 0. And the way to make this equal to 0 is I could just find the speed at which the numerator is 0. Equals 0. And then we get a nice, simple, beautiful expression for the characteristic velocity. It's just 1 over the stability factor, which would be the same as the square root of the wheelbase over the understeer gradient. So now I have a question for you. Why is it that the characteristic speed only exists for understeer cars? Can? What does that mean, Tim? Okay. You got cut off. Okay. Tim says can't divide by 0 or square root of a negative number. Yeah, exactly. Because understeer gradient is either negative or 0 for other cases. Okay, it would lead to a complex characteristic speed. Tim said meant to hit apostrophe and accidentally hit enter. Oh my goodness, those keys are right next to each other. What a disaster. Okay, you guys are right. If I have an oversteer car, the understeer gradient would be less than 0, and then I would get a complex number. So I would get an imaginary speed. So there's no real speed I can reach for an understeer car. Now, for a neutral steer car, if I could precisely be neutral steer, the understeer gradient would be equal to 0, and then I'd be dividing by 0, and the characteristic speed would be at infinity, which is undefined. So let's go back up to this plot really quick. I'm going to kind of erase some of this, because I want to point out what this graph would look like for an oversteer or neutral steer. So for neutral steer, what happens is you just get a straight line, basically, that just keeps going up. So your yaw rate is going to keep increasing per steering with speed. So it's kind of like your yaw sensitivity of a neutral steer car. It gets better and better and better at higher speeds. It never drops off. And that's why the maximum is theoretically at infinity for a neutral steer car. Because the most sensitivity, well, you get more sensitivity per speed. So now for an oversteer car, it'll look a little weird on this graph, but it increases and then it eventually reaches like a vertical asymptote. So maybe something like this. And I'm just going to put an arrow there because it goes up to infinity. So you get more and more sensitivity, but the problem is that at some finite speed, like in this picture, around 40 miles per hour, that response becomes infinite. And that's actually the definition of critical speed, which an oversteer car is the only car that has a critical speed, which is a speed where it essentially goes unstable. Like at 40 miles per hour, in this made-up example, if I introduce any amount of steering, the car's just going to spin out because the theoretical yaw rate is infinite. So you're done. Okay, let's do a quick example for characteristic speed. Oh, so I made some points here. We pointed these out together. So the characteristic speed gets higher. Well, looking at this expression, I'll have a higher characteristic speed as my understeer gradient gets smaller. So if you have a very understeer car, if your understeer gradient is some larger positive number, you're going to have a small characteristic speed. As you get closer to neutral steer, your characteristic speed increases. So we pointed out that a neutral steer car characteristic speed doesn't really exist for a neutral steer car, but this gives you the idea. Like the closer you get to neutral steer, your characteristic speed is going towards infinity. So that's why the characteristic speed is used as a measure of understeer. So you might be like, oh, this car has a characteristic speed 40 miles per hour. That means it's going to be pretty understeer. If you say, oh, this car has a characteristic speed of 100 miles per hour, wow, okay, it's getting close to, we would consider that more like neutral steer. And okay, so we said characteristic speed does not exist for oversteer cars. And why? Because the understeer gradient's less than 0, and we'd get an imaginary speed. Instead, an oversteer car has a critical speed, which we'll finish that up today. Okay, but first we're going to do an example. The characteristic speed for the BMW M4. All right, the understeer gradient for the M4, using values for cornering stiffness that we predicted, from a Skidpad test. So these are kind of estimates. But this is the definition of the understeer gradient. If you plug in all these numbers for a BMW, you're going to get 0.0017 radians of steering per meter per second squared of lateral acceleration. Because that's what the understeer gradient means. It means how much steering do I have to apply per increase in lateral acceleration. So an understeer car, you have to keep steering more and more and more. So on its own, we say that the car understeers, and you have to compensate as a driver by adding more steering. All right. Now, the characteristic speed, it depends on the stability factor. So the stability factor K is the understeer gradient divided by L. So we take this number, 0.0017 radians per meter per second squared of lateral acceleration, and we divide by the wheelbase, the distance from the axle to axle, front to rear, 2.81 meters. And we get a stability factor of positive 6.0262 times 10 to the minus fourth radian per meter squared over second squared. So we got an extra meter in the bottom because we divided by length. So a small number. The characteristic velocity or characteristic speed, this is the formula we got up above. It's square root of 1 over the stability factor. And when you do that, the BMW M4 has a characteristic speed of 40.7 meters per second. To get that in miles per hour, you multiply it by like 2.2. 91.1 miles per hour. So this is where we predict it has the most sensitivity in yaw to steering. 91 miles per hour. If you go back up to the graph, we're going to see that this agrees with what we thought it should be. Here's the maximum, and if you trace it down to the speed where that maximum occurs, yeah, it's around 90 miles per hour. So this formula, a very quick way of predicting that speed where you have most sensitivity. And like I said, if somebody tells you, oh, the characteristic speed of my car is like 100 miles per hour, that means it's more sportier in corners. It's closer to neutral steer. So if you're in a performance vehicle, you want a higher characteristic speed. Most passenger cars, it's probably like 50 miles per hour. Most passenger cars are really understeer. All right, it's time for the critical speed. Let's draw a skull and crossbones here. There we go. Danger! So would that mean less steering input for higher characteristic speed? Yes. Yeah, Ricardo. So generally, the higher the characteristic speed is for your car, the less steering you're going to need to navigate a given corner. So let's say we take the same corner in a neutral steer, oversteer, understeer car. An oversteer car is going to require the least amount of steering input, actually. Understeer will require the most. So yes, a higher characteristic speed, less steering generally required. A little more sensitive to steering. Okay, The critical speed, V crit, it only applies to oversteer cars. The critical speed is the speed at which an oversteer car has, theoretically, infinite yaw rate. So it's just spinning out like crazy in response to any steering input. This means basically, even if you hit a bump in the road that jars your front tire a little bit, your car is going to spin out. The slightest steering disturbance will just spin out your car. Hence the skull and crossbones. Okay, so remember this GR star, this is the ratio of your yaw rate to your steering. So we're saying at the critical speed, this ratio is infinite. So let's put this here. It's infinite, and so V crit over L plus 1 plus K times V crit squared. Okay. So how do we make this infinite? Well, we're talking about a situation where you're dividing by 0. If I divide by 0 here, infinite. So this gives us this condition. Set the denominator equal to 0. So we solve for it. Square root minus 1 over K minus L over UG. And so looking at this, you can tell mathematically why this only exists for an oversteer car. Because an oversteer car, by definition, has an understeer gradient less than 0. So the negatives of the understeer and this out in front would cancel out, and I'll get some finite number. An understeer car, the beauty is the critical speed doesn't exist. Like, think about that for a second. An understeer car, there's no speed you could be going where a little steering perturbation will spin out your car. That's why we design passenger vehicles understeer. We don't want people spinning off the road. Okay. We're going to go into the danger zone. We're going to take the M4, which is an understeer vehicle, and we're going to turn it into an oversteer vehicle. So how can you do that? One way to do it, this is probably the most straightforward way. I don't suggest doing this. By significantly increasing the rear tire pressure. And why would we increase the rear tire pressure? Well, we watched a little clip of a video. Okay, let's say I'm looking at a tire from the front, okay? So maybe, I don't know, this is like there's my headlight, there's my hood, and there's somebody in there. All right, this is what we look like for maybe just regular tire pressure. When you pump up the tire pressure, you kind of, I don't know, this is kind of extreme. But basically, you reduce the size of the contact patch. So your tire has less contact with the road, and so it has less grip. It has less cornering stiffness. A similar effect happens when you underinflate the tires. Let's try to draw that. When you underinflate, well, number one, like you'll see when you're like, oh, dude, that guy's got a flat tire, you kind of see that it's bowing out, right? But that doesn't mean that it has a bigger contact patch, because it kind of does something like this, actually. And so for an underinflated tire, you also have less cornering stiffness. So that's why when you open your driver's side door, usually on most cars, printed on the edge of the door is the recommended tire pressure. If you've never noticed it before, but it'll be like 31 psi front and rear or whatever. Okay, so what we're gonna do to make the BMW Oversteer, we're gonna increase the rear tire pressure to decrease the rear cornering stiffness. All right. So why are we decreasing the rear cornering stiffness? Well, to be oversteer, your understeer gradient has to be less than 0. And the part of the understeer gradient that needs to be less than 0, it comes down to this in beta term. Shoot, what is it? What's the technical name of this one? I think it's the static stability derivative. Somebody look that up. Tell me if I'm wrong. But it's equal to this. Or directional stability derivative, something like that. And we need to make this less than 0. Directional stability. Okay, thanks, Ben. So we need to make a car oversteer, the directional stability derivative needs to be less than 0. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to change the weight distribution, but I'm going to bring this number down so that I can potentially make this negative overall. What would I have to do with my weight distribution to make this more oversteer? If instead of just changing purely the cornering stiffness, how would I change the weight distribution to make it more oversteer? Make it front heavy? This one's actually a little tricky. I'll tell you why. Any other opinions? Make it front heavy? Rear heavy. Okay, so what are LR and LF? LR and LF, if I'm looking at a car from the side, rear heavy will increase LF. That's right. So let's draw our CG somewhere between the wheels, right? So LF is the distance from your front axle to your CG. So if I want to make this quantity negative overall, if I increase LF, well, the way to increase LF is to move my CG back. If I do that, it'll make this number bigger. And I can make it more oversteer. But that's actually... This is a less sure way, in my opinion, of making your car oversteer, though. Because, think about this. The more weight that I put towards the back, that increases the load on the rear tire. And we know from our analysis of tires that the more load you put on a tire, you increase its cornering stiffness. So now you actually have some competing effects. Because, okay, I make LF bigger, but if you do that, it reduces the weight on the front tires and it makes the front cornering stiffness smaller and it makes the rear cornering stiffness bigger. So I can imagine some situations where changing the weight distribution might not make it more oversteer. I mean, there's other effects, like when you bring in load transfer, which we're going to get into starting next week. I think overall moving the weight back does certainly make it oversteer. But I just wanted to point out it's a little complex because it also plays with the cornering stiffness. Okay, so anyways, our strategy today is going to be to decrease the rear cornering stiffness. So we need... This term has to be less than this term. So my rear cornering stiffness has to be less than LF over LR C alpha F. Now, if we plug in the numbers for the weight distribution of the M4, assuming we don't change the weight distribution, LF is that, LR is this, and C alpha F is 84,316 newtons per radian. And this is going to give us the condition that our rear cornering stiffness, and remember this is bicycle model, so this is the combined of my left and right rear tires. Combined, I have to get less than 75,981 newtons per radian. So we have to increase the rear tire pressure until the rear cornering stiffness gets lower than this value. Which if you were doing this in real life, you can't like just use a sensor to measure cornering stiffness. So you would just have to play with it. Keep increasing the pressure until your car is oversteer. All right, so let's say we reduce the cornering stiffness to 70,000 newtons per radian. I don't know, maybe they're like 50, 60 psi now or something. We like way overinflated them. So if we do that, here's the new understeer gradient. There's our formula. If you plug in all the numbers, it's now negative times 10 to the minus 4 radian per meter per second squared. So this is oversteer, meaning like as I increase my lateral acceleration, I actually have to decrease my steering. All right. So this would give us a critical speed. It's minus L over UG. If I plug these in, now I have a critical speed in my M4 of 56.9 meters per second. It becomes it's a real number because I have a positive number under the square root. 127 miles per hour. Now we can also plot our ratio of yaw rate to steering as a function of velocity for this oversteer configuration that we created. And you're going to see this instability at 127 miles per hour. So I have velocity on this axis. Here's this ratio. And you see like 127, I don't know, maybe it's over here, but our sensitivity is going up to like infinity. So well before you even hit the critical speed, your car is going to be it's going to be fishtailing. It's going to be hard to keep pointed in the right direction. Let's see here. So in MATLAB, I was playing around with this. So this is like our M4 brought into the digital domain. So I had my front cornering stiffness. This was our original rear cornering stiffness, which we predicted around 91,000 newtons per radian. Wait, why am I putting newtons per radian? No, that's right. Okay. So we bring it down to 70,000. Let's see, what was I doing here? And you see like now this car is just like, I just gave some random sinusoidal steering input and it's kind of steering like crazy. Or skidding and side slipping. And so we've been working with the linear bicycle model. This model wasn't even meant to do these extreme side slip maneuvers, because one of the assumptions is that the side slip angle is small. So if we did the full non-linear bicycle model and put some real tire properties in here, this thing would just be doing, it would just be spinning out. I don't remember what speed I was actually doing the simulation at. Yeah, so this was at the critical speed, but really it would spin out a lot more. Okay, so those are three main speeds that you need to know for vehicle dynamics. I wonder if you know how they live in Tokyo. Are you talking about Tokyo Drift? A drifting society. But you gotta know tangent speed. You gotta know characteristic speed. You gotta know critical speed. Let's see here. Yep. So guys, we need to start talking about suspension next week, because in order to get more realistic, in this corner, these outside tires are getting way more load than these inside tires. Well, depending on the speed, and that really does affect your cornering performance. So we haven't been looking at that yet. And the amount of load transferred, it depends on your suspension stiffness at the front versus the rear. It depends on how high your center of gravity is off the ground. It depends on your roll center axis. So we have a couple more weeks left, and the goal is to get into that so we can talk about load transfer. It'll be fun. And that's where we're heading. But that's it for today, my friends. I really hope you have a fantastic weekend. And it's beautiful outside right now. If you're in Buffalo, you should get outside. You should get on your skateboard. Go down the street. You should oversteer with your skateboard in this kind of weather. Hash Brown plans on getting outside. That's what I plan on doing. That's what I plan on doing. Right after I shut down this stream, I'm getting out in that sunlight. Hey Jenna, enjoy the weekend. Probably gonna help my dad with things outside. That sounds like a fantastic way to spend your weekend. Have some good times, make some good memories. Lewis says, should the lit review include or summarize each paper, or I just need to write out what I understand about the topic? So the literature review, yeah, Abhinav has a good answer. It should be a little bit of both. You should be summarizing the paper, but by the end of the literature review, just by you going through these papers, you should have developed some understanding of what are they doing, and maybe what are maybe some strengths and weaknesses of their different approaches, like what makes these papers different. And then you should be able to comment and kind of summarize like what's going on in this realm that you're looking at, whatever your project is on. Like, for example, Abhinav is doing ABS, right? So like anti-lock. Wait, are you doing anti-lock braking or are you doing launch control? Okay. So if you're doing that, there's different approaches that you might find in papers for like how they run their anti-lock braking systems. Oh, you're doing that as well? So you might look at papers that like try different approaches, and then you can compare them, contrast them, but you just want to demonstrate that you have some understanding from looking at a couple papers. This weekend is the Turkish Grand Prix. Lewis says some control technique seems too hard for me to crack in 2 weeks. Yeah, that might be a little tough. Hey, see you on Monday, Abhinav. That's good advice. Keep working on it slowly, each day. A little bit at a time. Incremental progress. All right, everybody, we're going to call it a day. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.